Welcome to Factfinder Investigates. I'm Domangue. We are continuing to ask the question of what is being done to ensure flight safety after the tragic mid-air collision in January near Reagan National. This week, we're sitting down with lawmakers as the first piece of legislation is introduced in the aftermath of that crash. Senator Jerry Moran wants the critical technology, also known as ADS-B, that sends out an aircraft's real-time location and speed to be turned on at all times when flying. The Army helicopter that collided with Flight 5342 had that system turned off at the time of the crash. Army officials have said it is common for military aircraft to have ADS-B off when they are on specific training missions like the crew was on that day. Currently, the Secretary of Transportation can grant exemptions to allow certain aircraft to fly without it. However, the newly introduced legislation would eliminate those exemptions and make it a requirement for that technology to be activated.
If they're doing training missions or flying through busy airspace, ADS-B out should be on. However, if there is an actual national security mission at play, true national security, how do they quickly turn it off? Because we don't want enemies to see our aircraft. But the way this has been operating, I would support the idea that yes, all of them should have ADS-B out activated.
Now, in March, the FAA announced that all aircraft around Reagan National would be required to turn on ADS-B when flying. This legislation would expand to every other airport as well. Moran also questioned the Transportation Secretary about the concern of helicopter flights out of the Pentagon coming close to DCA. Duffy says the FAA is keeping a pause on those flights.
Our teams are working together. I'm very concerned about the amount of traffic that's coming out of the Pentagon. And if there's VIP travel, I would like to know who are the VIPs. Who is traveling on these helos? Who classifies? I don't think any of you here get helicopter travel. Who's traveling, Senator?
It's one of the questions I intend to ask in appropriation hearings as we have Defense Appropriation Subcommittee hearings. I would like to know the answer to that question.
If you'd share that with me too, I'd appreciate it.
And lawmakers will once again be meeting with the FAA and the Army to discuss other restrictions that may need to be in place to ensure flight safety. That hearing is set for next month on June 11th. And this week, U.S. Representative Sharice Davids was in Wichita speaking with the families of victims that were killed in that mid-air crash. I sat down with her to talk about what more needs to be done following more airspace concerns in Washington, D.C. You know, we've heard the FAA, we've heard the Army, we've heard the NTSB all talk about the recommendations that need to be made because of what happened on January 29th. But then 2 weeks ago, an Army helicopter was seemingly taking a scenic route from what the FAA has said, and caused two flights in that same airspace to have to abort their landings. Sitting in your seat, what are you thinking when you hear the FAA admit that an Army helicopter didn't go to a helipad at the Pentagon, instead took a scenic route instead?
I mean, the simple answer is outrage. As a committee, we need to either come up with new legislation to address issues if there are things falling through the cracks, or do what we can to hold the FAA accountable. I know that, you know, the secretaries of transportation, the acting administrator of the FAA, and the secretary of the Department of Defense, they all need to be having those tough conversations. I have concerns about whether and how they're doing that, but I think that folks are valid and right to be frustrated when they're seeing news like that come out.
We've heard from the NTSB say they can make as many recommendations as they want when it comes to air safety. Mm-hmm. It's up to Congress and it's up to the rest to fully fund that, you know, to make those recommendations possible. Because then the FAA has to weigh them out and say, okay, what can we reasonably put forward given the money that we have? Do you think there was enough bipartisan support or enough support just in general in Congress or in the administration to increase air traffic control safety, to increase maybe some of the outdated technology that it comes with when it comes to air safety, to be able to make those recommendations that the NTSB may come out with in a year?
I probably wouldn't be able to speak to what they might come out with and whether the funding levels are there for those things.
But is there enough support?
What I can say is I think that my hope is that we'll be able to continue some of the bipartisan support we've seen in previous Congresses. I think that the FAA reauthorization had, I wish that it had been on the news more actually because of the type of bipartisan support we saw. And in that was support for funding to upgrade our systems, both the airspace, the air traffic control systems, as well as our landing systems and those technologies, funding to really ramp up air traffic control hiring.
When it comes to the January 29th crash, I think a lot of us now have kind of looked at the Army and the helicopter route as being a problem that kind of needs to be addressed with all the helicopter traffic in that area. But another issue that came up during it was Reagan National has added a lot more flights, I would say, in recent years, just from a lot of other places across the country. So it continues to increase the amount of just plane traffic that goes through.
One of the busiest.
Already with the helicopter traffic. Do you believe, or have there been conversations about putting a cap on the amount of flights that can go into Reagan National?
I do think that every time we have an FAA reauthorization, that's part of the conversation. I think that generally the conversation, because there are agreements that have existed for a long time around that, but yeah, absolutely, the conversation about the how many flights are coming and going, and I think that will probably be a bigger part of the conversation going forward. It's certainly something that a lot of folks have expressed concern about.
And we have more from my sit-down interview with Representative Davids. We talked about what other legislation could be introduced to protect travelers flying by air. We also talked about other issues impacting Kansas, including what farmers want to see in a new farm bill. You can watch that interview up on our website, 12news.com. Also to come, taxpayers have paid billions of dollars for internet companies to connect rural Americans with faster speeds, but despite programs being implemented, many people across the nation remain disconnected, leaving those with medical issues vulnerable.